So, guys, I do want to talk about Konosuke Takeshita. He is actually the winner of the G1, and that means he won this, tournament that lasted a couple of weeks, and he's going to be facing Zack Sabre Jr. for the IWGP Championship, which is also known as which is also the New Japan Pro Wrestling Heavyweight Championship at Wrestle Kingdom in January 2020, January 4th, 2026. I'm sorry to pull a Porky Pig. And then also, too, that, with that said, like the IWGP title is actually one of the most famous titles in professional wrestling. Like it goes along with the WWF Championship, the WCW Championship, the TNA Championship has been around for like 25 years, and then also goes with the NWA Championship. Like it is definitely a title that means a lot. And there's people like Brock Lesnar, AJ Styles, Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, Kazuchika Okada, and many other ones that have held that title really. And it's actually a big deal because this will be the first time that Takeshita will be a heavyweight champion with one of the major titles in professional wrestling if he does win this. So there's a lot of things to talk about, the good and the bad about this. There are a bunch of controversies. And I do want to say that there are a bunch of people who are fans of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and then there are a bunch of people who are fans of New Japan Pro Wrestling who are Japanese natives, and they're not liking this because they're saying that this is almost like very similar to Trick Williams winning the TNA championship. Like this can create a situation where it's like, oh well, if a New Japan pro wrestler is on American television, or if they're part of another company, they look a lot better, really. And I think that what I would have to say is that they are right about this, but it's definitely a 50-50. That's the best way to say it. Like, I do understand, because when I used to be a fan of TNA wrestling, right before 2014, and a lot of guys left, like AJ Styles, I was always saying that they seemed like they pushed a lot of WWE people, WCW people, ECW people. And sometimes, the difference between that and New Japan Pro Wrestling is that a lot of the TNA guys were really, really good and they could have gone somewhere. Just like, like Jay Lethal, James Storm, Bobby Roode, Samoa Joe, Abyss, AJ Styles, Kazarian, Christopher Daniels. They had so many, like, TNA people there for a very, very long time that actually people knew about, like Eric Young, Shark Boy. That's the Knockouts division. They had so many people in TNA that a lot of people knew about, and some of them were like there for like 5 or more years, really. So it honestly felt like you put like any of them with good booking and good stories, you could have done great things, really. So it does feel so that's kind of the difference. I think with New Japan Pro Wrestling, I think in general nobody knows who's on their roster really because they're so esoteric. I mean. And I'll use similar examples. Like you look at the AAA roster, that a person, if you want to do a pay-per-view for the AAA Heavyweight Championship, who are you going to put on there? Are you going to put on there Mr. Iguana? Are you going to put on there Alberto Del Rio? Are you going to put on there, like, a majority of people that people don't know? Or are you going to say something like, okay, well, maybe Dominic Mysterio versus whoever's the AAA champion? Like sometimes it makes sense to do that, or when they had the TNA Hall of Fame. I disagree with this, and I'll die disagreeing with this. They put Sting in first because most people universally know who Sting is, versus AJ Styles. Really, at that time, AJ Styles, if he had the popularity and familiarity that he has right now, versus when they put Sting in the Hall of Fame, he should have gotten that. So I totally get that argument. And then the other thing is that, you look at Ring of Honor. Like, Ring of Honor has been very poorly promoted in the Tony Khan era. So, like, most people don't know who the fuck's in Ring of Honor, really. Like, the most famous person that they have right now is Athena. And then the next thing is that you look at, TNA wrestling nowadays. Like, most people don't know who the fuck is on that roster, really, except for Joe Hendry. Everybody else, nobody knows about, So sometimes when you give a title that of your company to somebody else, really, who's wrestling in different shows, yes, it is controversial, and I do understand how that can be frustrating, And I also do understand how that can be helpful, really. But I think the big thing is you have to make sure that champion works with people to elevate them. For example, in TNA wrestling, you had AJ Styles work with Sting. You had AJ Styles work with Jeff Jarrett. You had AJ Styles work with Macho Man. You had AJ Styles work with Hulk Hogan. You had AJ Styles work with Ric Flair. You had AJ Styles, work with Bully Ray. You had AJ Styles work with Jeff Hardy, and that helped AJ Styles' caliber. What you don't do is you don't do something like Jay Lethal. Like, Jay Lethal had a segment with Hulk Hogan, he had a segment with Ric Flair, and then they got rid of him, really. And you can't do that with Takeshita. If he faces Zack Sabre Jr. and ends up winning, he has to really, do what he can to elevate the NJPW locker room. He can't just be like what Trick Williams is doing, where he just wins everything, and then a lot of people don't know who these TNA guys are, really. So I get that. He has to have a responsibility to elevate not just himself but New Japan Pro Wrestling, and that's one of the arguments. The other big controversy about it is Tony Khan, because I don't see any AEW post or any post from Tony Khan recently about this. You're going to London, and that is a big New Japan Pro Wrestling crowd. So are you going to do a segment on Forbidden Door, and he better do this, where Takeshita is celebrated? He may even have that that trophy he won, and then you may have him and Zack Sabre Jr. do a face-off, and then he may have a credit saying support New Japan Pro Wrestling. And then also you could even do something like maybe Evil or a few other people from New Japan are not happy with this. They beat both of them down, and then you have a match of Zack Sabre Jr. and Takeshita versus Evil and somebody else, really, at the All Out show. And then you kind of do then maybe you do Takeshita versus Okada at Wrestle Dream for his championship or something like that. Like how are they going to tie this into AEW? Because one of the other issues is that sometimes there's people who are achieving a lot of success elsewhere while they're in AEW, and AEW is not acknowledging that. I think they said that the Canadian MLW championship is held by Josh Alexander, or the Maple Leaf championship, but Josh Alexander loses a lot on AEW, really. So that's another thing. You ultimately have to tell yourself, really, how is Tony Khan going to promote this? How is he going to show New Japan Pro Wrestling that Takeshita's one of our wrestlers? This is a big deal for Takeshita. This is a big deal for New Japan. This put a lot of eyes on the product, really, because if they feel like, oh, well, Takeshita's not that well promoted, most people don't know who he is, really, he gets some reaction in Japan, but Zack Sabre Jr. gets a bigger reaction. He's well promoted. People know that he's a Japanese wrestler throughout the world. Then why would you put that title on why would you put that title on Takeshita then? It just doesn't work. Or Takeshita and this is another argument where if Takeshita feels like AEW's not promoting him that well, the only reason why he became the international champion was because he did that post saying, as a Japanese American man who wants to reach out to a Western audience, I'm sad with how I'm being booked. I'm sad with how I'm not being utilized to my best, really. And with what he's shown, really, with all the matches that he has, really, I agree with that. This can also trigger him to be like, what, I don't want to be part of AEW anymore because I don't feel like I'm getting that star that he deserves, really. He becomes like Ricky Starks, who's a great talker, or he becomes like, that woman who left Blake Monroe, that woman who's feuding with Tony Storm, really. I'm drawing a blank really quick. But you know what I mean. He becomes one of those wrestlers that go to WWE because they're not well promoted, and Takeshita would do very well in that environment because they would know how to utilize him. They would know how to say, okay, we don't have a lot of Japanese wrestlers or Asian wrestlers that have been booked that well. Here's a guy who's serious. Here's a guy who's not going to be Kung Fu Naki. He's not going to be Asuka screaming in Japanese. He's not going to be Shinsuke Nakamura, where he's not well utilized. He's going to be something that they're going to consistently use. So this can also be a motivation for him to say, if AEW is not giving me the recognition that I deserve for this accomplishment, or what I'm doing in New Japan Pro Wrestling, when this is actually like winning the Royal Rumble in a way, then fuck them. He needs to go on to another company, and that company more likely is WWE, or that is to be a full time NJPW wrestler. And I think the other issue is his booking in AEW, because really, if you are a member of the Don Callis family, you're what I call, no, sorry, there's a fucking B here, but you're obviously what I call the Will Ospreay jobber, or you're Team Rocket. And what I mean by that is, if you're part of the Don Callis family, you're always booked to lose if you're going against Will Ospreay. That always happens. You're always booked to lose when you're going against Hologram or other people that Tony like, really. Otherwise you win. I mean, how should I say this? Kyle Fletcher, Takeshita, Will Ospreay, a former member, usually win all the time, really, except under certain situations. Like I said, if Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher will never win against Will Ospreay. It's like the Tricks Rabbit type of thing. But also too, you meet people like Josh Alexander, Hechicero, Rocky Romero, Brian Cage, Lance Archer. They're all members of the Don Callis family who consistently lose all the time, really. So it's almost like, does he want to be in that group where a majority of people lose, where he is actually the biggest faction in AEW? And then also another thing is that it sends a bad message if he leaves to WWE or leaves to New Japan Pro Wrestling, or he's like a lackey when he's just in AEW, and he's part of this big faction. He's accomplishing these great things, really. There really, really, really has to be a sense of, okay, this has to be treated like a big deal. Let's learn from how TNA Wrestling is booking Trick Williams, and let's learn how WWE and TNA Wrestling is booking Trick Williams. Let's steal what's working. Let's steal what's not working. Let's make Takeshita this big star, really. But on the positives, I think that this is a good move, because Takeshita is familiar with the AEW audience. And AEW, I'm not sure. I think they usually get let's say 600,000 people watching a week or more. I'll just say 700,000. Then you have the pay-per-views, and then you have a lot of stuff with on it. I think they said the Sting retirement, Revolution, Sting's retirement. He and Will Ospreay had a great match. And then also this helped the career of Will Ospreay, really. And then you had that triple threat with him, Ricochet, and Will Ospreay. They tore it up in him and Will Ospreay tore it up in Boston. And usually when you put Takeshita on a card, really, he's one of those, I'd say those pseudo main event people. He's one of those people, when Will Ospreay was on the cards last year, where you ever saw a Will Ospreay match, it's worth your money. Now, if you have Takeshita on the card, it's worth your money, really. So it's that thing too, really, where I think that putting a championship on him, or having him go after this, have this honor where it's like winning the Royal Rumble of Japanese wrestling. This is actually a good look for him, and this is actually a good look for New Japan Pro Wrestling, because people know who the fuck he is, really. It really comes down to, is AEW gonna learn their lesson from Joe Hendry? And what I mean by this is, are they gonna do that dumbass thing like when Joe Hendry, did that dumbass turn, got an RKO, lost in 3 minutes at WrestleMania? Are they gonna do something like that with Takeshita, in the form of not featuring him, not talking about this, having him be a lackey, always losing to Will Ospreay, and whatever, really? There has to be a story. There has to be building up to this, because actually a lot of wrestlers from AEW go to Japan, really, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. They have to kind of say, we will market this better. We'll make the New Japan Pro wrestlers look better. We will actually, understand Wrestle Dream is another Japanese New Japan Pro Wrestling type of show, really, because it's a Taninoki tribute show. Are we gonna incorporate some Japanese wrestling to this? Are we gonna incorporate Takeshita's story into becoming the IWGP champion? There's so much stuff that they can do, really. So I do hope that they do that, because they understand that helps Takeshita look like this big international star, and that's a good choice to make him the champion, really. And then there's two other things I have to talk about. That I think another thing is, like what I said, there are people like me who want to go to Japan and want to endorse this really. Like we're like, okay, we want to go to Japan. We want to see Takeshita possibly win this because it's going to be a big deal for him. It's going to be a big deal for professional wrestling for this to happen, really. And then I think the last thing to talk about is what would happen if he's the IWGP champion? What are you going to do with this when he's the champion in AEW? Is he going to be like, Trick Williams getting choke slammed by the Undertaker? Is he going to be, walking around with that title in AEW? Is he going to be treated like like a main event type of guy? Really? Is he going to be on many pay-per-views with that championship? Is he going to be on Revolution? Is he going to be on Dynasty? Is he going to be on Double or Nothing? Is he going to be on, All Out and all those shows? Like, what are you going to do with Takeshita in AEW when he wins that title? Because it's not going to look good if you do something like he's holding his title and then he's just losing to Will Ospreay all the time, or he's holding that title and he's losing like multi-man tag team matches when the Don Callis family needs to lose. Or it's not going to look good if you do something like say, okay, well, he's wrestling in Japan, so we can't have him on television because we don't know how to utilize somebody who's a champion of another company and try to incorporate what they accomplished into the show when that should be what they're doing, really. So, like I said, I really just... And then AEW is a very weak storyteller. They have a lot of issues with their storytelling. So, I do think that, as I said, it's a major, major accomplishment. It is groundbreaking. It is somebody who deserves to be a champion, possibly becoming a champion. It's also a concern about AEW, like how are they going to make Takeshita ready for that spot? Because, again, they have I think they're close to 17,000 people in London, and this is a show where New Japan Pro Wrestling wrestlers come and wrestle, and they're featured, really. So what the fuck are you going to do with this guy who's won, like, one of the biggest accomplishments in New Japan Pro Wrestling? Like, probably the second biggest accomplishment. The number one being the IWGP Championship. What are you going to do at that show, really? And as I said, that if I was Takeshita, and if Tony Khan does not mention this, if they do not do a segment with this, he should just say, you know what, I'll go as far as go to WWE, or I'll just be a New Japan Pro Wrestling wrestler, because you really don't give a fuck about my image and my projection. And if Don Callis and whoever doesn't say anything about this, it really just shows that that he's just there. He's just there to be there, really. He's just there to be like hologram, not really become something greater. He's there to do the flippy ass moves, and that's it, really. But so Takeshita should also really monitor how AEW is watching him and how AEW treats this, because this could be, as I said, look at how they're treating Trick Williams. Look at how they're treating Joe Hendry in TNA wrestling. Look at how Joe Hendry and Trick Williams are being treated by WWE. By WWE, one's getting buried, and one is also an NXT guy with the TNA Championship, not really making TNA a better place and stuff like that. So they have to say, okay, well, Takeshi's on this road. Let's build some stories. Let's build some feuds. Let's have him face maybe former New Japan Pro Wrestling people or some dream match type of people who should have gotten the Japanese title, really. Like, what if you made Bryan Danielson say something like, hey, you know what, I want to test this kid, or Kenny Omega, like, hey, I've been a former champion, I want to test this kid. You do something with Will Ospreay, I want to test this kid, and you keep going down the list, really, or even like at the Hurts, you have Don Callis pay the Hurt Syndicate and say, hey, let's do MVP versus Takeshita. What are you going to do to make Takeshita show and shine, and then just promote this event for New Japan Pro Wrestling, get more eyes on it, get more people like me who can possibly travel there. What can you do with this? So it's ultimately, very, very important. Like I said, what they have to do, AEW has to do, is look at Trick Williams, look at Joe Hendry, look at the controversy around TNA, giving their heavyweight championship to Trick Williams, and how that's not helped them that much. And that's for another video. So congratulations to Takeshita. I want him to win. I want him to have strong booking. I want AEW to say, from now until January, these 5 months, really, we have to make sure that Takeshita is ready to go, really, and that he looks like he's the right candidate to win the title. Because if they don't do that, then he's just going to be a jobber to Zack Sabre Jr. And then they're going to wait for somebody else to take his spot really. So let's look at this accomplishment to Takeshita and let's book him correctly. Because if not, he's going to be another one of those wrestlers where he goes to WWE or back to New Japan Pro Wrestling to become a bigger deal.